Well, you can see behind me, I got my 40-foot high cube shipping container in. These are also known as Connex containers. Let me show you what it looks like inside. So the interior dimensions are a bit smaller, but this whole unit's about 40 feet long, maybe 8 feet wide, and 9 feet tall. It's gonna be able to fit tons of stuff in it. And we're actually gonna use this for storage, probably for the first year and a half. But ideally, I'd be able to turn this into a workshop in the future. And that's why I opted for the extra height unit. One of the perks of this container, at least for shipping purposes, is we have these welded on lash points around every 4 feet or so, and that'll let us tie down the unit for shipment. We're not at the point yet where we really need the shipping container for its intended purpose. So I think for now I'm gonna start throwing materials in it, such as lumber, just to stay dry until we're ready to package everything up. Well, I pretty much moved that whole stack. You can see right behind me, I have 37 of these old growth pine boards that were from my neighbor's attic before they had all their framing redone to get a new roof. I got this stack for free and I didn't really have anywhere to put it. So I had it basically sitting on the ground, covered with tarps and plywood and cardboard, any materials that I could find to try to keep the water off of it. And for the most part, it worked. It was only the bottom few boards that got damp, that have termites in them. But most of them were pretty dry and they were light. I could tell which ones had some moisture in it because they were heavier. Anyway, if I was to buy this wood from Home Depot right now, these 2x8s that are at least 10 feet, some of them are longer, up to 12, that would be probably $500 worth of lumber. But that $500 would go towards younger growth pine, which isn't nearly as strong and dense as this old growth stuff. That house that was renovated, I believe it was built in the 50s, so they would have had much older, bigger wood back then. Granted, a lot of this is crowned, so depending on what I build with it, I might have to cut the crown off and straighten it back out. That might cancel out the strength gained by them being older growth, but it's definitely worth preserving. So I have these little tobacco sticks as spacers that I got for free from a neighbor of mine. Anyway, this big storage unit is basically gonna act as a kiln this summer, dry out all the wood that I plan to save, and then we'll figure out what to do with it later. So as you can see, I have my new shipping container in the background. Well, I just bought this crazy bracket. You can see here this peg, it goes into the little corner thing, kind of like a Lego. And it's going to allow me to place the bottle jack underneath and lift up the corner without having to dig a hole to put the jack into. So let's see if it works. I only have one jack system. That means that once I lift up one corner, I need to shim it up with blocks of various thicknesses before I can move on to the next. These concrete pavers are enough to get started, but ideally, I'll have something thicker to keep the shipping container higher off the ground. That brings me to these pressure-treated 6x6 blocks, which I'm going to cut down into smaller pieces just to support each corner of the shipping container. These shipping containers are fabricated with strong I-beams that run the length and the width of the container, so you really only need to support it by design from each of the corners. In a permanent situation, you would probably want concrete footers that kind of go into the ground that prevent it from sinking, but for now, these blocks will do. Anytime I use the bottle jack to lift thousands of pounds like this, I like to make sure that the ground is solid enough to prevent the jack from sinking back down. So at least for the first pass, you'll see me lift each corner up only 1 to 2 inches at a time. This ensures that if a failure were to occur, the shipping container can only drop 1 to 2 inches instead of coming crashing down and potentially injuring me. So I repeat this process 3 more times so that there's a concrete block under each corner. I'm gradually shimming up this shipping container so I can get those pressure treated wooden blocks underneath. Those blocks are 5.5 inches tall, and that's a bit too much to move with this bottle jack all in one pass, so I'm gradually increasing the height. Great, now that the first pass is done, I'll set the jack on top of a spacer, like a half of a block or just something to give it a firm platform, then lift it up and put in the 5.5 inch pressure treated block. We had a thunderstorm shortly after the shipping container was delivered, and I noticed a small puddle forming in the back of the container. This hole was not visible to the naked eye, and it wasn't until I peeled the paint off that I could see through the shipping container to the light outside. I used a wire brush attachment for my grinding tool to peel off any of the chipping paint. My hope was that this would uncover any further rust areas in this part of the shipping container. You can see this entire area that was leaking had been patched before, and it looks like when they painted it, they didn't do a good job sanding or priming beforehand. So all of this needs to be peeled off and painted again. I bought this JB Weld product. It kind of looks like a big tube of chapstick. It's called the Steel Stick. It's some sort of putty that I could knead by hand, and it has steel shavings in it, and it's made for patching holes in steel. So I'm going to use this around the patch that I've already applied to the shipping container, just to make sure it's extra waterproof. This is also sandable and drillable like the patch that I used, and it's supposed to storm tonight. So I want to make sure that I go ahead and make sure no drips of water can come in. Let's see how it works. So I'm sure you noticed the patch that I applied when I was grinding and sanding down the paint. I bought this at the local automotive supply store, and it's used to patch auto bodies. Online you can find it in multiple dimensions, but we only had one left at our local store, and I needed to go ahead and get the patch on before a rainstorm was coming. So I already had the patch on there. Now I'm applying the JB Weld putty just around the seams, because I'd rather sand down this excessive putty than disturb the patch that I already placed that covers the actual leaks. I used the same putty to fill the holes from the inside of the container, and then it's ready to prime and paint. I also used my wire brush attachment to grind down any rust spots I saw on the outside of the shipping container, and then spray on this rust-proof paint. Well, I'm out here to show you the container. You can see here, any of the black spots have been places where I've ground down the rust that's been on the paint, and then I used a rust protective spray paint product. I believe it's by Rust-Oleum. I'd have to go back and check. Let me know in the comments if you want me to tell you what product I used. Anyway, you can see here I ran out of that paint. There's still a lot left to go, but I definitely tackled the biggest rust areas, and most of them were closer to the ground. So I felt it was a bit more important to get those tackled because we do have rain that can splash up against the unit here. I ordered this from Evian Containers based on some recommendations from another YouTuber that I saw, and I didn't really have the best experience with them. You can see here there's just so many dents. There's bound to be a hole. They do have a watertight guarantee. They claim that if you find any leaks within 5 days, they'll pay for you to get it fixed. Well, of course, I found a leak, and I showed you earlier in the video what I did about that. I sent them all the receipts just like they asked. I even billed them for my own labor because I didn't hire a professional. And customer service, they were great leading up to that. They were like, oh yeah, do what you need to do, we'll reimburse you. Well, as soon as I sent them the receipts, they basically sent me a receipt that said I'll have the money in my account in 3 to 5 business days, but it didn't show up. And then it wasn't until after I complained and left a negative review that I got the funds transferred. Anyway, it's a container, it's used, I have it, so I'm just gonna get my use out of it. I'm not gonna pay for shipping to try to get it returned or anything like that. Anyway, that wraps up this video. If you have any questions about my shipping container or the process I went through to kind of get it watertight, leave a comment below and make sure you're subscribed, and I'll see you next time. Thanks.